Hey everybody, Gary here, and if you're like me, you're spending less time outdoors taking photos and more time inside editing photos. So what better time to learn some new editing techniques? Today I'm going to share with you 4 easy steps that will allow you to make any subject pop so that you can turn something like this into this. So let's get started. So our test subject is this pileated woodpecker that I saw in Point Pleasant Park in Halifax back when we were allowed to go for walks in parks, and he got pretty close, so I was able to get a reasonably sharp image. So I think this will be a nice one to get started on. So this is a raw file, and obviously when we bring in a raw file, we first want to adjust the exposure and contrast. So I'm just going to bring the exposure up just a smidge. Going to go over to the tone curve, crush the blacks just a little bit. Let's see, maybe to about there. Then bring up our highlights so that we get a nice contrasty, nice punchy image, really bringing out his colors and that black and white contrast. Now we're going to go over to the detail refinement sliders. We're using Affinity Photo here. It's a nice Photoshop alternative for those of us that aren't fans of subscriptions. We're going to bring up the detail radius. We're going to go in nice and close so that we can see the effect that this is going to have as we increase the amount of detail refinement. We don't want to go overboard, but I think that's starting to look really good. We can begin to see the fine detail in the feathers. Then when we zoom out, yeah, that's looking pretty good. We're going to go back in and actually get rid of some of this luminance noise that's going on in the background. So we're going to hit that luminance slider just until we see a difference. And there, yeah, that's good. And again, we don't want to go crazy with that because we'll start to lose details, but I like this as a starting point. Now, next we want to actually crop this image just so that we get a little more focus on the woodpecker itself. So let's go with 5x4 because that's what we tend to use on Instagram. Square also, but let's go with the 5x4. And we want to use the rule of thirds overlay just to get that little cross section on the eye, just to draw attention to the eye. And then we're going to accept that change and we are going to develop our raw file. So now that we're here, we want to try and balance out the colors a little bit. So what we're going to do in order to do that, is we're going to use the hue, saturation, luminance adjustment tool. So all these tools, of course, occur in layers. And first we're going to do a big global adjustment, just focusing on the reds, making sure that that nice red cap gets a little punchier. And maybe the yellows as well, because of course he's got this yellow eye and there's some yellows kind of going on in the background and we want to give them a little more presence. Yeah, you can really see the eye beginning to get nice and poppy. Now the consequence of this is that we're starting to get a little too much green going on down here in the bottom. So we're going to make a selection of this sort of lower area. And this is just sort of a quick and dirty adjustment. You can get more sophisticated with this if you want, but just for the purposes of this little exercise, we're just going to select that entire lower area. And we are going to make another hue, saturation, and luminance adjustment. But this time, we're going to select those kind of yellow tones. We're going to bring them down, subdue them a little, and those green tones, we're just going to use the color picker and find one of these green areas, and we're going to bring those down as well. So there, that's getting a little dreary, but what we're going to do to punch it back up is we're going to bring in a white balance tool and just hit that to warm. Set that to warm rather. And that's looking just a little, maybe a little strong. So we're going to dial the opacity down. You can do this with any adjustment, but I find it's particularly good with tools where you're strongly adjusting color and you want to tune in that adjustment. Using the opacity on an adjustment layer is really nice. So the first thing we want to do now that we've gotten our colors right, we've gotten the details right and the noise right, we actually want to get rid of some of these distracting elements. And I mean, these distracting elements could occur in any photo, but particularly in these sort of outdoorsy shots when you've got lots of twigs and grass and so on. So let's just use the in-painting tool. Now what I've done is I've copied the background layer and I've made a copy. So this is just going to overlay on top, and we're just going to use the in-painting tool. Bam, that's gone. That's a distracting one. Bring this down. It's looking good. And good. So now that we've done this, I think the next thing we want to do, because we aren't shooting with a big professional zoom lens where we're going to get the utmost subject separation, we can do we can cheat a little bit. And what we're going to do, we're going to take a selection of the background, just a big selection. It's just sort of snapping to the edges, and we've got the soft edges selected so that this is not going to be a very hard anti-aliased, or rather aliased edge. We're going to have nice anti-aliasing. I talk about that like I know what it is, but I really don't. But let's see. So that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now we're going to, actually let's just make a copy of that. And we're going to go into filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and just like that, we've got a more out of focus background. So that's looking just a little fake, especially when we look at the foreground here, but that's totally fine. So what we're going to do, we're going to hit the erase tool as soon as we find it. We've got our hardness set to 0. Got the opacity at, let's say, 80%. And we're just going to gently go over this foreground. Now we're going to bring it down. Bring the opacity down a little more. Then into this area, so that we get this sort of gradual feathered Gaussian blur. You can do this a lot of different ways, but I find this is a nice way to do it, particularly when you have a very close foreground and you don't want it to look too fake. So this is actually looking pretty good. Yeah, and I think that's going to be our final image. So we're just going to hit export. We're going to set this to 2048 on the long edge. So we're going to put this one up on Insta, and I'm sure it's going to get a ton of likes. So that's it. Easy, right? If you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comment section below. Give the video a like if you liked it, subs if you loved it. Make sure you hit that bell notification so you get notified as soon as I upload something else. And until next time, take more photos. Later.